the printing press and the way it changed society through the inventions that came from it that helped shape the world. The printing press has known origins that date back to China in 932. We discover the first creations of a way to create text with wood blocks and ink on paper. And in 1041, we see movable type created in China. Instead of one single block of wood, we now see smaller blocks of wood with, on their own, have specific characters etched on them that are able to move around and print it onto paper wherever needed. And only 257 years later, we see Marco Polo report seeing the printing of paper money in China. This is the first account of currency being used with paper. And now we move on to who is often credited to be the creator of the printing press, Johannes Gutenberg. Gutenberg didn't really add or create anything. He just made the process of printing paper on text a lot quicker and easier. According to the book Communication in the Real World, An Introduction to Communication Studies from the University of Minnesota Library, it is stated that this led to the printing revolution that began in 1450, which led to more printers being created and more text being circulated over a large area of Europe. 43 years later, we see the creation of the first book with successful integration of illustrations and text, which is called the Nuremberg Chronicle. 2 years later, we see the first paper mill established in England, which is one of the first paper mills to be created in the world. 68 years later, we see an interesting law being passed in France. This law states that printing in France is forbidden without royal permission under penalty of death. The most common form of capital punishment at this time is still the guillotine. So it's not too far-fetched to say that some people met this fate just because they wanted to print a book or a few pages of text. This law was later quickly removed due to its harshness. And fast forwarding to the year 1776, one of the most important pieces of text is created by John Dunlap on July 4th of that year, the Declaration of Independence. After this monumental article of text, it is later printed and shown and or used in all U.S. colonies as their code of law.
In 1830, paperback books appeared in England and Ireland. According to Oliver Cortland from the Journal of the Independent Online Booksellers Association, paperback books go back all the way to the 17th century in France and Germany, where the first true mass market paperback thought was the so-called dime novel, which sprang in the beginning of the 1860s. Unlike hardcover books, paperbacks were not really designed to be treated with respect. They were essentially a disposable product, cheap enough to buy and throw away. By late 1960s, paperback books started to lose people's interest, where the start of the reprinting hardcovers in books started to come in. In 1879, the Ben-Day process for production of color images in newspapers was created. A technical dictionary of printing by Andrew Begin, he describes the Ben-Day process as a method of mechanical transferring lines, dots, and texture patterns to paper, metal, or glass. By general or local pressure on the back of the ink, Ben-Day screens were created and were able to be transferred onto newspapers. In 1092, air conditioning was accidentally invented by Williams Carried while developing dehumidifier for a New York printer. Etched zinc engraving began to replace hand-cut wood blocks. Coast finding movements called upon printers to adopt better accounting methods. International stereotypes and electroplatters unions formed. In 1905, the Society of Printing established in Boston. At the end of the 19th century, Boston was a hub for printing and making beautiful books. Prospects of the arts and crafts movement interested in all aspects of books productions organized a series of lectures and printing that was included in a Boston Public Library course in 1903 through 04. In 1911, Allied Printing Trades Association formed from 5 unions, including the International Typographic Union, ITU, and the Pressmen, Bookbinders, Photo Engravers, Stereotypers, and Electrotypes Union Pressmen, home established by the International Printing Pressmen and Association Union of North America. Situated in Tennessee, it was a trading center, healthcare facility, and resort for a union member and the families that operated for 65 years. In 1914, the American Institute of Graphic Arts was founded in New York. An American Institute of Graphic Arts and an advocate for commercial graphic design of all the main manifestations for exhibition programs, in particularly active. It exhibits the results of international competitions, displaying the leading examples of book designs, printing ads, promotional materials, product labels, and packagings. And finally, in 1932, Times New Roman typeface debuted by the Times newspaper in London. Commercials released the following year by the Monotype Corporation.
According to the American Printing History Association, in 1938, there was the development of photocopying, a long way coming from the days of the original printing press. This evolutionized the future of how the printing press evolved throughout time. It was not until later in the 1950s that this was further introduced more commonly into the workplace. Even later in time, around the late 1960s, we saw Xerox create the laser printer. In 1969, the laser printer was invented and was extremely helpful in the modern workplace. Another revolutionary thing to happen in the era was in 1981 when the internet was invented, and 2 years later, the desktop publishing. I didn't even know that the internet was that old. I would have figured it was newer than that, but learn something new every day. 10 years later, the World Wide Web was developed. From here, we see a skyrocket in the world of technology referring to the internet and World Wide Web. We see the evolution of social networking such as Facebook in 2004 and Twitter in 2006. How is this connecting to the printing press? If it were not for the invention of the printing press, we would not be able to see the sparks that flourished these ideas. In 2007, we saw the invention of the Kindle E-Reader developed by Amazon. This was the idea of replacing books, ergo, start of less need for printers. 2009, there was a further invention of this idea through the Nook, created by Barnes & Noble, which we know is a huge book retailer. Apple jumped on this bandwagon in 2010, taking it a step further with the capability of both being used as paperless book and a laptop-like tablet. Furthering the invention of the internet, we see a boom in social media with the creation of Instagram, also in the year 2010. Now in 2017, we see the technology of thermochromic ink stamps from the U.S. Postal Service, from the printing press being banned in certain countries, evolving to woodblocks, paperless readers, and the creation of heat-sensitive ink. The printing press created a spark of evolution in the ideas of printing, paper, and technology as we know it. According to the Gutenberg Press, from the treasures of the MacDonald collection, information has been able to be spread quickly ever since its inception.